Okay, for our spring break look here, as we try to kind of follow along with our reading in World War One, we're going to pick up where we left off in class. Here we're going to begin looking at the German response to the beginning of the war. So up through class, we talked about the origins of the war and the assassinations of Franz Ferdinand. Now, in particular, we want to look at the German role in expanding the war. A lot has been said at the time and historically by historians how much blame Germany really has in the war. Obviously, the war started in the Balkans. The Austrians, the Serbs, the Russians certainly are the ones who start the war, but if anything that Germany can be blamed for is widening the war into a much larger war. The German war plans had already been hatched up. They'd already realized that these rival blocs that Europe had divided themselves into was essentially creating a situation in which a large war was possible. So the Germans had planned for that in the event that they had to go to war with the Entente. And what they basically had on the shelf was a war plan known as the Schlieffen plan, which was proposed by Alfred von Schlieffen. And what it called for was the prevention of a two-front war. They saw a two-front war coming. Obviously, if you look at the map of the Triple Entente, you would see that. And so, to prevent the two-front war, the plan was to eliminate the Western Front and then go and take care of the Eastern Front. The Germans believed that a war would be much longer with the Eastern Front because just the size of Germany. So they thought they could quickly take France out of the war. And the plans also believed that Great Britain on its island, kind of on its own, would be out of the war. So really, when we look at the German expansion of the war, it's really twofold. The first, obviously, is the blank check they're giving to Austria-Hungary in support for their aggression. And the second is the attack on Belgium and then eventually France. So the war called for was an end-around attack on France, cutting through Belgium. And I'll show you, we'll look at the map here of the Schlieffen plan. And so essentially the French had planned for a direct attack across the German-French border. The Schlieffen plan called for an attack through Belgium. However, Belgium was guaranteed its neutrality, so everybody believed that the neutrality would be respected in regards to Belgium. Instead, the German army goes tearing through Belgium, destroys much of Belgium as it goes through it, and then attacks France in an end-around attack. The Schlieffen plan almost is successful, except they'll get bogged down at the Battle of the Marne outside of Paris, and then we start settling into this Western Front, which you'll read about the Western Front and the trench warfare that develops there. The negative impact of this, though, is what becomes known as, to people at the time, the Rape of Belgium. And this is what's going to really draw Great Britain into the conflict and expand the war. So really effectively what the Germans do is the Schlieffen plan fails. In the end is they do much destruction to Belgium. They anger the rest of the international community, draw Great Britain into the war, protecting not only its ally France, but also avenging the attack on Belgium, and we create a two-front war that Germany was hoping to avoid. And obviously the worst fighting of the war and the most of the deaths will occur on the Western Front. So we can see the attacks and destruction in Belgium from this institution, the Schlieffen Plan. You can also see some of the propaganda that was out there, and this propaganda is the common theme of the rape of Belgium, as if Belgium was in and of itself an innocent woman that has been taken by monstrous men and destroyed. Well, as I said, it's the first Battle of the Marne that stops the German forces. They do move quickly. What happens in the invasion of Belgium and in the invasion of the Western Front in France is actually uncharacteristic of World War I. Most of the war we think of as being bogged down in trench warfare. We think of something as being very slow and slaughtering and the battle lines moving very little. But at the beginning of the war, the Schlieffen Plan moves very quickly, and the French have to respond to that. And they respond to the first Battle of the Marne, where they basically throw everything they have at the invasion German forces to protect Paris. And famously, as you read, the French even used taxis from Paris to be moving goods back and forth and troops back and forth, and there's even stories of bicycles moving ammunition and those sorts of things back and forth to the fronts to hold down. And what ends up happening is the French end up bogging down the German forces before they can reach Paris. And with the institution of the new machine gun, the war starts. The two sides start to dig the series of trenches that create this kind of stalemate warfare that is characteristic of World War One. So we look at why Germans were so aggressive. This is something that many historians have tried to write about because, again, you can't blame Germany for the war, but you can certainly look at how the war plays out and blame them for expanding the war into a much bigger conflict and maybe even creating the Western Front. And so why did Germany seem to overreact to a battle that was going on in the east over the Balkans between Austria, the Serbs, and the Russians? There seems to be this huge overreaction in the invasion of Belgium and then into France. One theory that McKay tackles, that many historians have proposed, is that there's a feeling of loss of power in international diplomacy, that they could reassert themselves as this powerhouse. After Bismarck left, many in the German government felt that they were losing ground at every turn. Bismarck seemed to be strengthening Germany's stance in Europe and in the world, and since then it seems like Russia was gaining ground, Austria was gaining ground, France is gaining ground. So maybe this was just to show their strength and to assert their power, and then of course get gains out of this war that they thought would be over rather quickly. Everyone thought at the beginning of World War One that this would be a fast war, a clearing of the air, so to speak, but no one predicted it would be what it would be. Second theory that comes out is that this was again a continuation of trying to put down the rising socialism in Germany. Of course, the SDP is the largest party in Germany at the time, and we saw that with Bismarck and his desire to try to put this down. War is a great distraction. Many people have written about the old wag the dog theory that, the tail wags the dog. You create, these wars as distractions to internal issues. That is possible because certainly war rallied everyone in Germany around the government and the more conservative government. But at the end of this, nationalism is at the heart of this war. Both the nationalism of the Balkans, the separatist nationalism, and nationalism within pre-existing states like Germany that led to ideas of militarism and imperialism. My country is better than everyone else, and I need to prove it, and I need to protect that. As McKay said, in all of this, the wealthy governing classes certainly underestimated the risk of war to themselves. And what that means is it seems to be those in power and those with wealth thought that war would create rallying around their conservative bases. And in the end, long, bloody wars tend to do the exact opposite. We've even seen that in our own country, and in our own history. Long, bloody wars make a society very war-weary, and in the end, they tend to turn against the status quo, and those that they seem are to blame for such conflicts. So, as you're going to read in your trench warfare sources, what ends up happening instead of this fast war that they're talking about, we end up getting this very slow conflict. The invasion of Belgium turned into a bloody stalemate on the Western Front, creates the Western Front. Trenches were dug in to really escape machine gun fire. What's interesting about trench warfare is it seems to be this military strategy that is trying to deal with technology that's got ahead of the strategy. Industrial warfare and the technology that is brought, it's gotten way beyond what military planners understood, keeping in mind that many of these generals are products of the 1800s. And so they're not really sure how to deal with machine guns and some of the other things that come along. So they start digging these trenches to get down machine gun fire, because the trenches become in place for the old formations. They wanted to move these massive formations and charges. So trench warfare is the characteristic fighting on the Western Front, to less extent on other fronts. And these trenches stretch for hundreds of miles across the Western Front. And what it does is create massive casualties. And we're going to look at the Battle of the Somme in Verdun. The Battle of the Somme is the bloodiest battle in human history. Nearly 1 million people die in this battle to move the lines miles, dozens of miles. Very little land is actually taken. So it's characteristic of the slaughter in which this kind of stalemate fighting trench warfare becomes. You see that life, of course, is very miserable in these trenches on the Western Front. It's cold, it's wet. Oftentimes when you're in the trenches, you can't, you get cut off from supplies. Dead bodies are in the trenches. You can't get them out. It's pretty much horrific stuff. And of course, with that comes disease and even rats and all sorts of vermin. So here you can see kind of a quick schematic look of how the trench warfare systems worked. The front trenches would be facing the so-called no man's land, as you can see to the left, and those would be facing the enemy's trenches. And the goal then became to create these charges over the top to take the other enemy's trenches. Again, very kind of like formation type fighting, thinking that it's coming out of the 1800s. So they would bombard the other trenches, hoping that it would, quote, soften the trenches and then lead these charges. But in the end, these charges almost always fail and leave massive casualties in their wake. So reading the sources. Here's some more images of the misery that was trench warfare. Trench warfare in World War I basically becomes some of the worst kind of warfare in human history. World War II is going to be certainly the worst war as far as casualties that humans ever engage in, but the amount of people dying on the front, I mean, this fighting's more horrific. In World War II, people went to the fronts and then they came back and they got a break. People that were in the trenches were surrounded by death on a daily basis, and they never got out of it. And the casualty numbers are just so obscene in these battles that the nature of actually being in the trenches in World War I is quite horrific, and has a cultural shock to populations that had lived for the years following, which we'll talk about and study some more. To deal with trench warfare, it is interesting how industry plays a major role. The machine gun was there. We studied since the Maxim machine gun, which really in a way creates trench warfare. But once trench warfare develops into stalemate, they try to come up with innovative ideas to break that stalemate. You can see on the right the airplane meets warfare. First it was used for reconnaissance. And then sometimes to drop bombs here and there. It's quite comical, actually. Sometimes they just literally pull a bomb out from between their legs and try to drop it. Later, because those planes' information they were gathering was really valuable, each side started sending other planes up and trying to shoot them down, and then we get the birth of aerial warfare. The tank was perhaps the most important innovation that comes out in dealing with the trenches, which allowed for protection as moving over the top in the later 2 years of the war and the introduction of the tank. We already saw the introduction of U-boat warfare, and also to deal with this is poison gas, mustard gas, just chlorine, poison gases to try to drive people out of these trenches. So we're going to stop the video here, and we're actually going to look at how the war widened, the widening nature of the war and how it spread across Europe and into the Middle East and pulled people from all over the world.